So can I invite all the other speakers and Uncle Tom Cobley and all to join us in a bit of a conversation, which is partly a free-for-all, but I've got questions to ask, obviously. Thank you so much, Laura, for that.
You're welcome.
I think while people are joining, I mean, the actual question that was actually pitched was an interesting one to me, because it said, essentially, is it okay to cry in front of other professionals? What do you think of that?
I want to hear Brian answer that.
Okay, well, I'm gonna for my 2p worth, I'm gonna pitch my kind of question as a summary. So we'll come back to this one. Brian, don't forget, okay? We've been at Agile sort of kind of appeared, let's say, in a documented form, let's say, around 20 years ago, but people were behaving with agility before then. But what interests me is the fact that 20 years on, I don't think we're even halfway towards being agile as an industry, if agile is the right thing to do. And I want to kind of just relate a little bit of ancient history, and it's partly apocryphal, but I've been assured by Tom Guild, who's on the call, that I'm not a million miles off when I tell this story from around the mid 70s to late 70s. So in those days, this is 40, 45, maybe longer, a number more years ago, there were a group of really smart guys on the same corridor in IBM. I can't remember where in the States, and they were all working on, in effect, methodologies. And what they came up with was a range of techniques, a group of techniques which could be used to build systems. And I was reminded, I don't know if you can see this, if I can get it in front of the camera, structured analysis and system specification, Tom DeMarco, circa 1978. And I've bookmarked a couple of things. So one of the philosophies was, we're going to draw models before we start writing code, okay? And you can see they're kind of, I don't know if that's clear, but they are kind of handwritten. And that was one of the informal rules that these guys said, this is the way we should behave in our systems. And those models should fit on a piece of A4 or letter size paper, right? So imagine these are things that are stuck on the wall, hand drawn, shared between people in a corridor or in a locality to build systems. Stuff like data flow diagrams. And if you like, what I just showed you, each of those blobs, okay, looks like a story to me. They would have called it a process in those days, but it looks like a story. And there are connections, that is, there are workflows. Mid-1970s. They also came up with something really remarkable called structured English, okay? I don't know if you can read any of that, don't worry about it. But how different to a cucumber story is that? 45 or more years ago. We had the tools that Agile promote nowadays then, okay? But what happened with the structured methods is, as soon as industry or the IT industry got hold of those methods, they decided, you know what, we can build tools, we can build monstrous methodologies for corporates to take on 1,000 man-year projects with, blah, 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 and the whole thing got commercialized, and everyone lost sight of the fact that this was a lightweight approach to building software. We've been here before, you know, and I wonder how familiar that kind of journey to the Agilists over the past 20 years that would be, because I remember about 10 years ago, lots of messages saying, you know, testing was dead. Remember those ones? But Agile is dead as well, in that it had been commercialized out of all recognition, and we're losing sight of the real principles and the people stuff that Laura's been talking about. And I think Giles or Jonathan has put up the manifesto for half-assed Agile software development. You can see the abuse that it's taken. Now, so my question to the group is, could we have made more progress than we have? You know, I'm acting as devil's advocate, but in 45 years, I don't think the tools we use are much better. What do we think? What does the team think?
I can start.
Yeah, please.
So the Agile Manifesto did us a world of good. It shook up the world. It really did. At the time, it was highly controversial and meant to be so, hence the word manifesto. So we all think it's a wonderful thing, and And that's kind of our, if I could use the word, kind of our God. And then from that, we spawned all these religions. we have, you know, we all sort of agree with this basic thing, but then we all have our own biases, our own knowledge and skills, and we've carved off individual, we've written a few books, created a certification program, and PMI has one too. So, and then that's created massive confusion and it's gotten to a point where if I'm a consultant, I have to get 12 different certifications to cover everything, to cover all the different sources of knowledge. So I think that lack of centralized body, if you will, sponsoring Agile has actually kind of hurt us. Like if you look at PMI, like it or not, it is kind of a controller of the body of knowledge and spreads it. So at least there's some common thought. And you can say that's a bad or a good thing.
Thank you.
So if you think of the different renaissance that have occurred with the way we work or the way that we approach work, and for people who've been in the industry for a long period of time, you know, we've went in waves. And so, you know, I lived through those hardware days that Laura was bringing up, where I literally slept underneath my lab bench. And, you know, first silicon and first release of, you know, the 386 and the 286 and all those processors was a dedicated bunch of people who slept underneath their desks. And I remember that notion of putting your hand on your car and it was still warm in the morning when you finally did go back to the office, if you did get a chance to go home. But work culture has changed and connectiveness has changed. You know, not too many people are buying fax machines anymore, or you know, I think the overall business of pagers has pretty much gone away. And I think we're closer now together than we ever have been. And I think that produces a set of, I think, awkwardness and a set of complexity that then overlaps across of these methods that, you know, if I go think of every time I read about Tom Gilb and his work, you know, some of those things that were being brought up and talked about at the time, there was not enough oxygen in the room to be able to go off and talk about those things. And today, as we grab onto those ideas and pull them to a time to go solve a problem, I just think that sometimes we're more open to go doing things, and other times the crisis has us go and have to go search those things out. COVID is a great example. Everyone didn't expect that I would be reading right now that Salesforce, Microsoft, Intel, my old former stopping grounds, and others have all just got rid of, you have to come to the office to work, and they're looking at permanent work from home strategies. Who knew that was going to happen? You know?
Am I being pessimistic about saying that we haven't made progress? Or I'm sorry for ranting, by the way, but it seemed like a good idea for the time. Brian, please.
So, Jerry Weinberg used to say that he had done test-driven design on the Project Mercury in the 50s. And with all due respect to a giant in the field, he's wrong. These, similar to a person that I knew who said they had done object-oriented programming in assembly language in the 60s. He's wrong too. These things aren't, all of these things are a network of related things. Don't know quite how to express this well, but in fact, since I don't know how to express this well, I'll be quiet until I can think of the right way to express it well.
Let me tell a very quick story about when C++ came out. And at the time, I was working on a testing standard. Can you believe? I wouldn't do that again. But and the guys who came from a company that built a code software analysis, a code analysis tool, and particularly C++, said that in all their clients that they found, all the developers were using C++ to write C. They weren't doing object-oriented analysis or design or programming or anything like that. They were simply using a C++ compiler to write C because they wanted it on their CV, of course. And did we not do the same thing? Is not a risk, or is there not a history of us as an industry taking on things like Agile, dare I say, and paying lip service to the real discipline and philosophy of it? I mean, I guess that's my gripe, in that I feel that as an industry, we fail in this way.
Well, I thought of what I couldn't think of later. I'm not sure this is quite addressing you, but there's this idea in user interface design that actually comes from psychology of affordances. The typical example being that we've all experienced is these doors that have a thing that wakes you want to push on it, and you push on it and you realize you have to open it. There are certain kinds of door fastenings that afford pulling and some that afford pushing. And the things like TDD that I talked about and C++ that you're talking about are because, in large part, because the affordances are wrong. If you work in, say, Smalltalk, it wants you to do things in an object-oriented way. And so you naturally slide into doing things in an object-oriented way. C++ does not. C++ is like pushing on a door when you should be pulling on it. And that's one of the reasons why Agile happened at the time it was. It was at a time when both the business world, especially the business world around software, and the technology afforded the development of this style of working. So until you have the surrounding environment, the idea just is not going to stick.
That's really interesting to hear that, Brian. I just want to also try to transition us to the wider Q&A. So thank you, everyone, all the attendees and participants who have listed so many amazing questions. There were so many, actually. We're unable to put Slido back up because they're just such a huge volume of questions. So what we've done is take the questions and kind of theme them into clusters. And what we're going to do now with this last Q&A session for the conference is do a bit of round robin style. So speakers, I'll be asking you a specific question, but please, if any other speaker would like to jump in and also help answer the question, please, you're more than welcome. But we'll do a bit of round robin style and then open up to some wider questions for everyone. So to kick off, Mark, you're up first. And the question for you is, was the commercialization of Agile a good thing?
I guess and no. I am disappointed with the way it's become fragmented. I'm disappointed with the infighting. I'm disappointed with the lack of discipline. That is, to be honest with you, I think it has done a disservice to our business community and to PMOs, because if I'm a certified ex-master, and I'm a PMO and I don't know Agile, it sounds like you know your stuff, so here's a couple of $1 million for a mission critical project. And by the way, the Agile people say, don't, we're different, just let us do our own thing. They're not disciplined, they're not educated, stuff goes bad and Agile gets blamed. It's not Agile's fault. Agile's amazing. Some people take a less rigorous approach to it than others. To add to the previous question, are we in a better place? Absolutely, we are, because teams I've worked with are happier teams. They have more joy, they produce better quality, they bond as a team. We never had that before. I'm old enough to remember when we worked in cubicles. And Scrum, by the way, some people believe Scrum was a mechanism to get people out of their cubicles to actually talk to each other once a day and provide some status. So there's some history behind Scrum that's kind of interesting. And do we really need that now? Do we need to coax people out of cubicles? It's a different world. But that's another story.
Good. Thanks, Mark. I think a lot of us can empathize with everything you just said. Giles, you're up next.
Oh, okay.
Do you think Agile has been successful? If it is a journey, how far along are we?
Oh my God. Groundhog year. I genuinely, I don't know. I'm going to actually borrow, if Mark is cascading his answers from the previous answers, I'm going to do the same from Mark's, because I actually think it's a bit of a yes or no, obviously. It's a very subjective question, isn't it? Has it been successful? I mean, we wouldn't be here if in many ways it hasn't been. In one form or another, mindset, philosophy, values, whatever that actually is, ultimately yes, right? And why there's still this propensity for new people being here today, joining in the conversation, wanting to learn new, and obviously listening to the amazing thought leaders who have joined us here today. At the same time, to Mark's point, we've missed some key moments in this journey. We've missed some key things that we could have done differently. And I genuinely think, from my perspective, with some of the organizations I've worked with, you know, I think I wish we had done more with the senior management in organizations earlier on in process than where we are today. For me, they seem to have been left out of the conversation on so many occasions for one reason or another, whether on purpose, whether it was just through the natural world of it's only for technology teams, this new crazy thing called Agile, and therefore the rest of the organization doesn't need to hear about it in any way, shape or form. And for me, I think if we'd had that conversation 10, 15 years ago with some of these senior managers, actually brought them on the change journey with us, I think today we could be in a completely different position than where we actually are. Now, my hope and aspiration beyond this, and obviously why we're here, why we're wanting to host this event, and why we put this together as a little community, is that, you know, in possibly 5, 10 years, things are different, and perhaps we do play catch up. You know, there's the meme, going around, who started your digital transformation in 2020? Was it the CEO? Was it the CFO? Was it COVID? I mean, it was one C, but we don't know which one. So, you know, the point being is we need to obviously still do a lot more to change organizations, organizational design, system thinking, system design, design thinking, whatever you want to call it. So yes, to a large part it's been successful in one form or another. No, it hasn't been in another form or another. There's still a long journey to go. But let's celebrate the successes of everything we have done. Let's not keep beating ourselves up for some unknown reason, flogging ourselves, and sort of saying, we've done a really bad job on this over the last 20 years. We haven't, right? We have made huge strides. We've made huge progress in organizations. And some of the new ways of working we have are phenomenal. We've just got to keep going. So that's my answer.
Thanks, Giles. Brian, you're up next. This is a little bit familiar from the question that came up in the panel discussion, but it's such a goodie that we clustered a couple questions together. So I'm going to ask you directly. If you had a chance to either add a new principle or remove one from the manifesto today, what would it be?
A principle as opposed to a value.
Oh, expand that out, sure.
Well, I still don't remember any more of the ones that I said I would add when I spoke earlier. I'm sorry, I have no thoughts in my brain.
Mark's got his hand up.
Mark?
I could offer one. We've got several, but one might be visualize the work, and I forget the last part of it. But that visualize. Oh, limit work in progress.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Good. Any other speakers want to opine?
Well, I think one of the principles must be to take those principles and apply them. In that, what's not to me, not necessarily very clear is that we're a technology industry, but actually, you know what? We're not really. We're a fashion industry. Every time the next shiny thing comes along, we all run towards it and all think, and then all that stuff that we've been learning for 5 years to throw away, relearn, make all those same mistakes again and again. But this is a kind of a grumpy old man's kind of position. But what I didn't get from the Agile Manifesto was this is a cultural human change, not a technological solution to the problems of the past. And it's all about people, and that's why Laura's talk was so important. And yeah, so there was nothing about people other than the people and interactions thing. I think that's probably the area that it was a bit lacking. If Laura wants to come into that, that's my view. No,
Right,
Laura?
Well, I could say, I guess, reaching backwards, it's okay to cry to work, but it's kind of a bad sign if it happens a lot.
So I thought about this, and here's my take on it. I had tears in my eyes because I'm deeply connected to what I do here, and it connects to my life purpose. And I am fine with that making a few people uncomfortable, because I am here to change the world. And it's a reflection more on people who ask a question like that than it is on me.
I mean,
Okay.
just to add to that, Laura. So, I mean, your story was really, I think, hit home on a few things. And I remember having an Agile team, and we actually had a very similar circumstance where one of our developers was in a car accident with his family, and one of the lead developers, which his absence. Fortunately, he was fine. His wife, unfortunately, had to go through multiple surgeries. But I remember this was right before a demo meeting, and we were at a sprint review, and our customers immediately said, "How can we help?" Not just the team pulling together, but now we've got the customers who are saying, "You know what? This stuff that we're delivering, we understand that it's important, but." I remember the one customer, that's why we do an MVP, is because we know that if it doesn't happen, we can slow down, it's okay. Can we send some engineers to also come in and help? And it was just this great outreach of being open and human, because it's funny because I've been seeing a lot, not that I'm old, but I have been seeing sort of this trend going on in the tech industry where they look at the color of your hair, or in my case, the lack of hair. And there has been some, cashing out of the more senior people within the organizations. And my view is that us as us being able to be humans coming together to go build something. I think if you look at the manifesto, it tried to go off and bring in the human elements together, but I think it just needs to be clarified a little bit. And even some of the earlier drafts, by the way, were much more clear on here's the stuff that customers should care about. And this is a document Alistair shared one time. This is the stuff that, the manager should care about, stuff that applied to the management types. And these are the things that the team should care about. And those got stripped away at the final release. And it would have been good to have kept that, because I think it would give some people some focus in saying that this is actually talking to me, the manager, or this is talking to me, the customer, me, it's the teammate.
And Ray, this actually segues really nicely into the question that's next for you, which is, yes, I know. Is there any undiscovered area left for exploring with Agile? I think you might have already started to answer that a bit, actually.
I think the answer is yes. I mean, I think if you look at the complexity of delivering anything, there's always a new dimension to the problem. And having, and I've seen a lot of colleagues who've not had to work worldwide before, now having to go work worldwide to get stuff delivered, or work in this manner, where we're all behind this, the camera. I think that as we're discovering things like, case in point, I see, you're again going through and taking, say, Snowden's ideas and evolving them to where it fits his mental model better, or taking other concepts that we learned before and then bringing those up to where we now have a new method that's coming out. I think we just need a bigger stage that we can talk about those methods more, because I think what happens is it gets put away, or it doesn't get main stage. When we're talking. The last component of it is just, and this is one thing that I hope our community could do better. Cite your sources. Cite what you learned from. Cite who you got it from. Reach out to others and saying, look, I learned from this individual. Give them credit. Too many times we just see something, I look at it and go, that looks a lot like so-and-so's work. And questioning them, where did they get it, and then find out that they thought it was public domain, when reality is it's somebody's IP. Please go through there. So I don't know if I fully answered the question. The things to explore, I think, is the further left of the life cycle, which is in the opportunity phase, when we're framing new opportunities. Some of the business agility stuff starting to frame that really well and nicely. And then there's this other opposite end of the front I don't think we've talked about at all, which is, how do we make something go obsolete and do it in a way that's humane? Because some things, like Clippy. I mean, we all like Clippy, Laura. I don't know what you're getting over Clippy about, but Clippy had a really terrible retirement, I think. Versus it was part of the pulp culture that we created in tech. And I think we have to have a better, more graceful way of putting things out to pasture.
Great, thanks, Ray. Laura, you're up next. Sometimes some people say we might be overhyping Agile, and therefore sometimes delivering disappointment. We've got a great theoretical idea, sometimes don't expect to reach it. What are your thoughts on that?
So Agile is a journey, not a destination. So somebody who's saying, are we there yet, has missed the point of the last 20 years, in my opinion. So you start where you are, you figure out what your North Star is, and you move towards it. And overhyping, I think it's ironic that we talk about overhyping, and then at the same time, I think one of the universal challenges for most organizations is we don't communicate nearly enough. So more honest communication and linking vision to what we're doing today, and less hyping would be good. But it's all a journey. And anybody who says, we didn't get there yet, so this stuff must not work, has missed the point.
Okay, thanks, Laura. Jonathan, you're up next. How can we influence management who aren't following Agile principles or prefer a more command and control style? Or you can expand that question out to just management not necessarily following the Agile principles.
Sure. I'm not sure if I'm the best person to answer this, so I may divert the question slightly.
Yeah.
But that's absolutely fine. Partly one of the things I definitely wanted to kind of bring in, and I'd love to hear everyone's opinion here, is around applying methodologies that are designed for manufacturing into software development. I think, throughout today's session, we've talked about the human aspect, which has been raised over and over again. And, but we still apply Lean, Six Sigma processes because we feel comfortable with the success maybe Toyota's had with the manufacturing, but people aren't a repeatable process. There's so many more moving components. And I love what Ray had to say, and obviously Tom Gilb's here today. And I tried to kind of, I don't know, Paul did pick up a book. This got published back in 1973, and the slides which I'd put on quickly around my TED talk, I talked about Hewlett and Packard doing what I thought was iterative in the same way that Tom wrote Evo. Part of it is these processes of build and test,
you know, and you can see the picture of back in Silicon Valley where I'm stood next to the garage where Hewlett and Packard was doing those first calculators. You know, there's so much that we've come a long way with, like language and all this other kind of stuff, which Paul was showing in the book that he picked out from the 70s, that actually some of these engineering practices and how we go about developing software, maybe we need to own Agile a little bit more, and that maybe, you know, not applying other disciplines is the right way of doing it. And I'd love to hear what people have to say about that. And so yeah, that was kind of my answer to a completely different question.
Thanks, Jonathan. Jürgen, this is actually right up your alley, maybe. Did you want to opine on this one? Influencing management?
Sorry, I was muted. You'd have to rephrase the question for me, because I lost throughout Jonathan's reply. I lost what the question was actually.
Sure, it's how can we influence management who aren't following Agile principles?
Well, what's their problem? What is the problem of the managers? You need to empathize with them. You don't ask managers, can you please be agile? No, you go to them, you empathize with them, and you try to understand what their problems are, and then work from there. Like one of the most famous books ever written is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the habits, as I remember, is seek to understand before trying to be understood. And that means that whenever we want to get something done by someone, we want to change their behaviors, we first need to understand them and figure out what is on their minds. So the example that I often give was when I was CIO, I want to get something done by my CEO at the time, because I had all these developers breathing down my neck, but we don't have sustainable pace, and we were working overtime far too much, etc., etc. I didn't go to the CEO and said, well, we need this, we need that. I understood his problem, which was that he got phone calls late at night from our customers that the websites were down. That was his problem. He didn't like that. And I said, okay, I'm going to work on that for you so that you don't get those phone calls anymore. It was quite coincidentally tied to the problems that developers had about sustainable pace and everything. But I phrased it from his standpoint, from his perspective. I tried to empathize with his needs, and I did not use the word agile or scrum or whatever. Who cares? Okay. I was solving somebody's problem, and the CEO is just as much a human being as the developers. And yes, even the CEO is allowed to be happy, just like everyone else in the company. And yeah, in that case, I was able to turn things around. And one of my few achievements in life is that I was able to get to turnaround drop to practically zero in just 2 or 3 years time. It was like 10, 15, maybe almost 20% at times, because things were not working well. But after introducing agile practices, there was happiness apparently, because people didn't leave their jobs anymore. It was far too much fun where we were working compared to any other offers that they were getting. So I think that was quite an achievement with Agile.
Good, thanks, Jürgen. Mark, you're up again. Should organizations be 100% Agile?
No. I mean, I think that it should be the default. I think that we should try to be as agile as possible. But as I said, I'll give you an example, an IT example. Maybe I want to bolt in a product that we buy, do an integration, it works with everything else, a CRM or whatever, and then send them away. That's a project. You staff teams, you get vendors, shortlist, blah, 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 bring them in, they build something, warranty period, that you release them. I'm sorry, that's a project. That's not a product. But anyway, that doesn't really answer your question, because you can still use an agile approach with that. But clearly there's a different example within a company. I'm rolling out infrastructure, a Windows upgrade across the company. That can be done in a serial fashion with a work breakdown structure. I'm sorry, it can be. So not everything has to be agile. And it's not black and white, by the way. It's a lot of PMOs are bimodal. If you pass this checklist, you can do agile. Otherwise, you're stuck with the big methodology. Too bad for you, because you've got a team of 15 people, and our checklist says the team has to be 9 or less, because that's what Scrum says. So how ridiculous is that, right? It's not black and white, it's gray. And in fact, in the toolkit, the DA toolkit, it's not 100% agile strategies. There are some things in there, like a requirements document, that might not be classic agile. But you know what? In some situations, you're going to need to do it. If you're tendering something out to a vendor, you can't just give them a few sentences and user stories and tell them to come back with a quote. No, you're going to have to actually get forced into a little bit more upfront to hand it off so they can actually bid on it. And you can either throw up your hands and say we're not doing agile, or we can say this one little bit, we'll step back and do something a little bit less agile, and then once we get into the project, full speed ahead with agile. So it's a hybrid, and it comes up to this, right? Thinking. Yeah, like I love what Tom says about this stuff ain't new. It's been around for decades, and people are reinventing it and thinking this is brand new. It's not. I'm a methods nerd. That's my background. A method is a roles, activities, and artifacts, and rearranging them and calling them a method is what we've been doing for decades. RUP, Rational Unified Process, that I used to teach, used to be a thing. It's got some good stuff in it. It's got some bad stuff in it. Nobody even talks about it anymore. We repackaged it and come up with new stuff. So the answer is yes. You just need to be flexible, pragmatic.
Good, thank you. Okay, next I'm going to open up to a panel. Oh, sorry, Paul, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if anyone wants to speak, just wave your arm and keep an eye out. I think there's a notion from most technologists, and let's call ourselves technologists for the time being, put themselves at the center of the universe, and that makes us less capable of listening well to our customers, of delivering value, and doing all the good stuff that we talk about, because we think everybody in the planet should be agile because we're agile, even if we're actually not so agile. And the thing is, some businesses are not agile in that sense. Banks are never, ever, ever going to be agile. It's just not the way they do business. And government, some aspects might be agile, but others, absolutely no way. Forget it. So that does not mean that individuals in those businesses cannot have an agile philosophy and be quick off the mark and respond very quickly. By the same token, people who are agile can still work in waterfall projects. You're just a bit quick off the mark, but this is all down to the individuals themselves. I mean, there are smart people who worked in waterfall who make things work, who get things done, and there were people who did not. By the same token, there are people who work in an agile environment who aren't so capable. Agile is not fairy dust that makes people suddenly more productive. So I think we should step back from thinking agile is agile is the center of the universe, and we should, by some kind of, morphing, or I don't know what the word is. I'll think of it in a minute. But we shouldn't assume that we know best, and it's a very arrogant position. So anyway, that's what I would say.
Well, just to add to what you're saying, I think, it's funny because we keep talking about it as a thing versus something that institutionalized, that becomes the dominant narrative within the organization. And I've seen plenty of adoptions, where, they treat it as a destination and all of that, but resilience, building organizational resilience to saying, we are a flexible organization and being able to go off and address the needed complexities of delivering X. Agile is about that. And I think what I hear in most companies, that when they're starting off, in particular, the agile way of approaching things is a fit for purpose, yes, but it's also, there's a lot of vulnerability that exists in most organizations in the very beginning. And what it goes is, it simply is that most of the upper management, when Jürgen was talking about his stuff about the culture of management, is that agile is what they do. Those people over there. It's not what I do. It's not how I act or behave, or it's not the company culture. And so the vulnerability that's built into the system at that particular point is where most people go to that death spiral. And I've seen companies where, to the point where agilists rename themselves because they're vulnerable, because they're suddenly someone's gonna come after them because they have Scrum Master by their name, versus the opposite of that, which is it's essential to our business. It's how we work. And that to me is a dominant cultural phenomenon that occurs when the management of the organization, the leadership, and I don't mean leader in the term of a leader who is at a CEO or other position. I mean all leaders within the organization, all the way up and down, go, this is essential and this is how we get things done.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, I've got one last, oh, sorry, Jürgen, were you gonna?
Well, one silly example just came up, if you allow me 1 minute to share. So we have elections coming up in the Netherlands in a couple of weeks. And because of COVID, they've decided that people from 70 years and above are allowed to vote by mail. Now, I know in the US this has been a bit of an issue. But in our country, this is going to be tried for the first time. And I am surprised that they actually tested how that works. And it turned out that half of the elderly people are unable to fill out those forms correctly. So half of the voting forms have to be rejected. I thought it was amazing that they tested it. The only problem is everything is already printed. Everything is already done, basically. They cannot just print all the forms again. And I'm with my agile mindset, I think, oh my God, I mean, it's so simple. Just test this as quickly as you can, a couple of times until you have those ratios down to only a small percentage doesn't get the forms. So agile has a long way to go, and nobody uses the word agile in this context, but that's what it is. Right? It is having a shorter feedback cycle, testing before you go full steam ahead with printing all those forms. So the solution is now better explanations of the complicated forms for a million people. And oh my God, it's so simple. So yeah, we have a long way to go with agile. I don't care if we call it agile or anything else, but yeah, that's just what occurred to me during this conversation.
Thanks, Jürgen. Actually, Paul, can I move on to the last question? Okay, so, huh? No worries. Okay, great. Oh, I've got a question that I'm just going to open up to the panel, but I'll start off with Giles, if you could please kick this one off, and then anyone can jump in. So all of us who are attending this, participating, speaking at this event, I think it's safe to say that whether we're on, the first days of our Agile journey, or we've been doing this for 20 plus years, we're all here because we love Agile, or we're curious about it, we're passionate about it. It's our calling for some of us. I've heard that phrase tonight. And we're keen. We're Agile enthusiasts on this call. But my question to you all is, starting with Giles, is, has Agile actually created any damage?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I love the fact that as soon as I said that, there's just everybody nodding heads, which is great. Yes, absolutely. I think to some of the points that not only were raised in the panel discussion, but actually were raised through some of the TED Talks earlier today as well. I just think because some of the things we've done, a lot of organizations, certainly have ended up in a situation where the organization has been sort of crushed into a particular way of working or a particular framework without it being allowed to grow, evolve naturally, organically as well. We've ended up in this situation where, it has created organizational damage, shall we say. And instead, what we should have done is actually sort of sat there, gone back to basics a long time ago, just like the same comment I made earlier with the management piece. We should have sort of sat there, taken the organization as this entity, and actually found something that actually worked for it, rather than somehow being so prescriptive. Now, I again think that, a lot of us, especially in the coaching world, need to be thinking that we should be trying to find, in many ways, to find ourselves redundant in the organization. We go in, we provide help, we provide this coaching, this mindset approach, we provide the appropriate tools and processes and raise the awareness of them for the organization to work out what's right for them, instead of kind of armies of consultants coming in and actually kind of going, you do this, you do that, you do that, you do that, boom, and then the organization fails. You just have to go back to all the state of Agile surveys. The 15th is now being run at the moment, and I know there's members of the panel here today who've been actively sort of pushing and asking people to make sure they're filling this in, which is phenomenal. And yet you see also the McKinsey and the Deloitte surveys as well, which are sharing the things where the percentages of organizations that not only just move beyond short-term transition but move to that long-term sustained transformation. Now I know Jeff didn't want us to use the word transformation, so let's use the word evolution, change, growth, whatever it is that we want to use instead. But it has done damage. But again, right, with everything, as I said, let's not beat ourselves up, especially for those people wanting to learn about it. It's done an inordinate amount of awesomeness and good for organizations as well.
Thanks, Jazz. There's time for one or two more, if anyone wants to go.
I'll just keep it short. True story. One time I was asked to go into an organization, a fairly large organization. They had tried an Agile, and I will use the word transformation, twice, with one of the largest consultancy groups in the world, and failed miserably twice. And they asked us to come in and said, Mark, help us choose our ways of working. This ain't working. We got to do something different. But I only have one thing. You can't call it Agile. So I'm like, what? So true story.
A fool with a tool is still a fool. I don't think Agile does any damage. People do damage.
True. Actually, I think I remember. I mean, again, this is a kind of an old man's kind of perspective, you could say. But I remember reading the Tom Peters books, in Pursuit of Excellence and those things in the mid '80s, and being very impressed by some of the stories. One that just came to mind when Jürgen was telling his story about voting and stuff was, I think was it Lee Iacocca, who used to be the head of General Motors back in the 60s. And it's an apocryphal story, it's like most stories. And he was like a new chairman of the board, and there was a suggestion that they should take their best-selling car, take the roof off and make it a convertible and see whether that would sell. And the designer said, well, it'll take us 6 months to figure out how to do that. And the marketing guys would say, well, our marketing plan will take 3 to 6 months. And the production director sort of said, oh, it'll take 9 months to tool up and this, that, and the other. And Iacocca slammed his fist on the table and said, no. Take one of our cars, cut the roof off, tidy up the bare metal, drive it around town and see if it turns heads. Do it this afternoon. That's what's possible in a corporate. That's what's possible in every organization. So Agile isn't a process or a method, whatever. It's an attitude. And there are Agile people that, I mean, how the hell did we build the bloody pyramids except with agility? Tell me, So Agile with a small a is not new. It's a human trait that's been suppressed by the processes that we've applied in the past. And we're beginning to open the doors to allow people to express their creativity and just productivity as well. So let's not pretend that it's new. That's kind of my take on that.
Yeah.
Great, thanks, Paul. Great. So just
Brian's got his hand up a second. Just one second. Brian's got his hand up.
Thanks.
2 points. One is it certainly has hurt people because the character traits that were once fine in a team, some of those character traits are no longer so fine because of an emphasis, say, on communication. The second thing is there were two purposes to the Agile Manifesto meeting. One was to figure out what these different methods or people had in common. And the second was to find a better name than the name that was used to describe them then, which was lightweight methods, which is not best from a marketing point of view. And the term Agile was a great success from a marketing point of view, to the point where everything where to the point where it's become a synonym for good. And I actually kind of think that was a problem, because now everybody wants what they do to be called agile, because if you're not agile, what are you? You're torpid or inflexible. And so quite a long time ago, I found myself wishing that we hadn't named it Agile, because it's too attractive. And I proposed the alternative name, artisanal retrofuturism crossed with team scale anarcho-syndicalism, because nobody will hear that and think, oh, why, that is exactly me. It might be better if we talked about our specific thing rather than make our specific thing all under the umbrella of Agile.
Brian, thank you. Thank you for that. I feel like I do identify with that name, to be fair. But speakers, thank you so much for your time. Laura, Brian, Ray, Jeff, Jürgen, Mark, and then our organizer. Oh, I love the dance party too. And our organizers, Paul, Jonathan, Giles, thank you so much for the last 3.5 hours, starting with our Futurespective panel, through to the TED Talks, and through to Laura, your incredibly moving presentation and talk. Thank you so much. And Giles, do you just want to take us home for the rest of the night? Well, take a, you know.
Look, I got to say, I'm gonna,
your place, Giles.
yeah, exactly. Party around here. Anybody wants to come? Unfortunately, international travel is restricted, but look, I've got to give my major appreciation to everybody. Okay, thank you very much as always for coming on and doing these. You know, I've got to give obviously my thanks to Laura. You know, your talk just, you know, had me in bits as well. So, you know, the empathy that you showed and the emotion that you gave was just exemplary. So, you know, heartfelt thanks to you for that. You know, and again to everybody else, Mark, Jürgen, Brian, Ray, Jeff, all of the things you've shared to this community here today. I mean, at one point, you know, with the registration numbers, you know, 1,302 people from on GoToWebinar. I mean, these are just insane numbers. So, you know, you've got to be absolutely, you know, very proud of the impact you're having on this community. Not only those who have been around the block like myself, but for those people who are only just starting that journey as well. I hope that all of you will certainly take part in our book that we want to put on beyond this, and add your own sort of sentient thoughts, and give those to us to share to the wider community as well as we go forward. But, you know, from us, from JPEG Worldwide, from the Agility Leadership Network, I just personally want to say thank you very much to everybody, to my fellow colleagues, Ashley, Jonathan, Paul, for being absolutely rock stars as ever when we do these events. And I genuinely look forward to seeing you all at an event very, very soon.
Or 20 years away.
Thank you, Giles. Thank you for hosting us.
Thank you, Giles. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Well, guys,
Yes, guys, see you all very soon.
Take care. Be safe.